He would need to become a human to live perfectly a sinless life. He would have to sacrifice himself for an unworthy humanity. He would have to come back from death. He'd have to come back to life from the grave. And he would have to return to heaven to pave the way for us, for mankind. With man, this is impossible. To be God and become human. We can't do that because we're not God. To live perfectly. We're told that we all have sinned. And who would sacrifice yourself for Hitler? Would you give your life for Hitler? I wouldn't. But you think of 1,000 trillion times worse than Hitler, and yet Jesus did. He did. He gave his life for somebody. You think of the worst person that has ever lived or will ever live. That's who Jesus died for. Now, they may not accept his salvation, but he died for them. And then he's died for me. So far, I haven't killed anybody. But I've sinned in my thoughts, in my actions, in my words, in my deeds. I've sinned. And they may not be the most heinous things, but my sin has separated me from my God. And so I am unworthy of this sacrifice. Then to come back to life. When somebody's dead long enough, we can't revive them. Now, we can revive somebody after a couple of minutes when the heart starts beating, but when they're dead, they're dead. We don't have the germ of life within us to bring somebody back from the grave. And then, no matter how hard we try, we're never going to make it to heaven on our own to go back like Jesus is going to do. So let's look at some of those real quick. So he would need to become human. But in Isaiah 7:14 it says, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign, and behold, a virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel." There's a biological process that has to go on for human life to begin. A virgin just doesn't have children. And I want you to key in on what he would be called. The Hebrew name Emmanuel literally means God is with us. Isn't that kind of poetic? That a virgin is going to be with child and bear a son, and he is going to be called Emmanuel, which means God is with us. So God is going to become, well, that's one for me. He's going to become a human, and he's going to be with us, among us. So, in Luke 1:34, we see how these things start to play out. So, the angel came to Mary, said, "You're going to do this?" And she says, "Well, how can this be, since I'm a virgin?" And the angel answered and said to her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. And for that reason, the Holy Child will be called the Son of God." A miracle would have to take place. Galatians 4 and verse 4. "But when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, so that he might redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoptions as sons." So, it came about. A miracle, he did. Then he has to live perfectly, a sinless life. It had never happened before. That was the flaw in the law. Nobody could keep it perfectly. Romans 8 and verse 3 says, "For what the law could not do, weak as it was through the flesh, God did, sending his Son, his own Son, in the likeness of sinful flesh, and as an offering for sin, he condemned sin in the flesh." Jesus is perfect. 1 Peter, actually Hebrews 5:15 first. "For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. That verse to me means a lot. It means a lot because I'm putting my faith in someone, and while I don't fully understand how he can be God and in the flesh man fully, both at one time, what I do know is that because he was in the flesh, he understands what it's like to be in the flesh, and we can go to him as our high priest, and he can sympathize with us. If he couldn't sympathize with us, how lost would we be when we petition him as a high priest if he didn't know what it was like to be in the flesh? So he was without sin. 1 Peter 2:21, for you have been called for this purpose, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example for you to follow in his footsteps. Now that's a scary thought. Peter wants us to follow in his footsteps. He wants us to be perfect like Jesus was, who committed no sin, nor was any deceit found in his mouth. So not only did he do it, but he wants to be the example for us. He wants us to live as perfectly as we can. But thankfully, he understands that when we fall, he's going to show us grace. Okay, so then he has to sacrifice himself for unworthy humanity. And first, let's think about that he has to sacrifice himself. Hebrews 5:7, in the days of his flesh, he offered up both prayers and supplications with loud crying and tears to the one able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his piety. Although he was a son, he learned obedience from the things which he suffered. And having been made perfect, he became to all who obey him the source of eternal salvation. Key in on that he had to learn obedience from the things which he suffered. He did that willingly. He made it through the suffering because it had a purpose. He learned obedience from it. And because of that, he has become to all who obey, all of us who, through obedience, he has become our source of eternal salvation. He's our trailblazer. Hebrews 7:27 says, who does not need daily, like the high priest, to offer up sacrifice, first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. Because of this, he did it once for all when he offered up himself. Now the key there is that he offered up himself. He didn't have to do that. But also, there's a quality of what he did. We'll see that in just a minute. How much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works? So there again, he offered up himself. He wasn't made to do this. But he did it for an unworthy humanity. Romans 5:8 says, but God demonstrates his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners. Okay, when we were sinners, this is when God put this plan into action. Christ died for us. Much more then, having now been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from the wrath of God through him. For if while we were enemies, it's not just that we were sinners, brethren. God considered us enemies to him because of because we weren't obedient. I don't know what the best way to say that was, but we're enemies, unworthy humanity. Then he has to come back to life from the grave. Focus in on the death part. In John 19:32, so the soldiers came and they broke the legs of the first man and of the other who was crucified with him. Now, why do you think they broke his legs? They were trying to speed up the process of death. As long as your legs worked, you could push up and get breath. But when your legs are broke, there's nothing really to push up with, and so you just hang down there and you're going to suffocate quicker on the cross. So they broke the legs of the two thieves. But when coming to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead. So he did die, according to the Roman soldiers who were experts in killing people. He said they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. Why do you think they pierced his side? They were confirming that he was dead. He could have just been passed out. They made sure he was dead. And thankfully, they missed the bones because there's a prophecy that said no bones would be broken. So he didn't have his legs broken. And when they pierced him, blood and water came out. Didn't break any bones. But then listen to what John says here. And he who has seen has testified, and his testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth so that you may believe. I love that idea that John is saying, I witnessed this. And I'm telling you truthfully, he died. I saw it. And because I saw it, I want you to believe in it. Again, in Luke 23, verse 46, he says, and Jesus, crying out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. He died. And now when the centurion saw that this had happened, he began praising God, saying, certainly this man was innocent. So the centurion understood that Jesus had died. And all the crowds who came to see this spectacle, when they observed what had happened, what did they observe what had happened? What had happened? Jesus had died. They saw this. They saw that he died. They began to return. It's over now. So they began to leave, beating their breast. They were happy with what they had done. And all his acquaintances and the women who accompanied him from Galilee were standing at a distance. And what did they see? They are witnesses to his death. They saw that he died. So first, to come back from the grave, you've got to die. Then you have to be buried. And Joseph brought a linen cloth and took him down, wrapped him in the linen cloth, and laid him in the tomb which had been hewn out in the rock. And he rolled a stone against it, against the entrance of the tomb. He was buried. But he was raised. In Acts 2:24, but God raised him up again, putting an end to the agony of death, since it was impossible for him to be held in its power. Peter is saying God raised him, and it's impossible for death to hold power over him. And that reminded me of what Jesus had said. I say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and guess what? The gates of Hades will not overpower it. Death will not be able to do anything about it. And in Revelation 1:17, Jesus declares that he's alive. John said, when I saw him, I fell at his feet like a dead man. And he placed his right hand on me, saying, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, but behold, I am alive forevermore. And I have the keys of death and Hades. I thought that was an interesting phrase. Oh boy, he has the keys to death and Hades. So he has the power over death, but he has risen. What is this? Call it out. It's the pyramids. Now, what did they put in pyramids besides a whole bunch of treasures? Dead people. They put in the tomb of the king, the emperor, the pharaoh. So if you go to Egypt, they've pulled some of these out. This is King Tut's sarcophagus. Where is this? Westminster Abbey. And what did they bury in Westminster Abbey? Dead people, but special dead people. Kings and noblemen have their burial place in Westminster Abbey. Where's this? Arlington Cemetery. And this. The tomb of the unknown soldier. We pay homage even to a fallen soldier that we don't even know what his name is. That speaks a lot about a people, I think. All three of these have something in common. What are they? Dead people are still there. We have an empty tomb. If Christianity would have been disposed of early on, what would they have been able to do if they were going to be successful? Recover the body. Bring the body out. Show everybody he's still dead. The empty tomb speaks that we have a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. There's all kinds of pictures on the website of empty tombs, especially when we've got Easter coming up. There's all these really cool graphics, but I didn't want to put one there. I don't know what Jesus' tomb looked like, but I know one thing: it's empty. So he has to return to heaven. It's one thing to carry out your mission, but you got to get back. And as we read earlier, that these men said, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking to the sky? Jesus, who has been taken up from you into heaven, will come in just the same manner as you have watched him go into heaven." He said he goes to prepare a place for us. And when he was raised from the dead, he was seated at the right hand in the heavenly places. It wasn't just that he went back home. He went back home and took a special place. Every priest stands daily ministering and offering time after time the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But he, having offered one sacrifice for sins for all time, that's what I said about the quality of his sacrifice. He only had to do it once, and then he sat down at the right hand of God. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. He has completed the course. He is our trailblazer. And this lesson draws into sharp focus what Jesus has done for us to help us to get to heaven. Oh, for a home with God. Jesus is back with his Father in glory, where he started before time. He's our trailblazer. Thank you. Class dismissed.